Upon entering the maid's room, the millionaire froze at the sight of a painting on the wall. The same one his beloved painted before disappearing 25 years ago. Nathaniel Brooks stood at the window of his study, staring out at the sprawling grounds of his Boston mansion. The view was picturesque. Meticulously trimmed hedges, a grand fountain glistening under the faint moonlight, and the dim silhouette of the city skyline in the distance. Yet, none of it mattered to him. The beauty outside only served to amplify the emptiness within. The mansion, a symbol of his towering success in the real estate world, now felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. In his hand, a crystal glass of whiskey caught the faint light, the amber liquid swirling as if reflecting the storm of emotions brewing inside him. His gaze shifted upward, landing on the painting above the fireplace, a vibrant depiction of a field of sunflowers bathed in the golden hues of a setting sun. It wasn't just any painting. It was her painting, Vivian's. His chest tightened, the familiar ache spreading through him as he studied the intricate strokes of her brush. The painting had been her last creation before she vanished. 25 years ago, she'd poured her heart into it, just as she'd poured her love into him. Nathaniel's jaw clenched, and he turned away, unable to bear the weight of it for another second. He drained his whiskey in one swift motion, the burn in his throat a small but welcome distraction. Setting the glass down, he ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, his reflection in the darkened window catching his attention. The man staring back was powerful, wealthy, and feared in the business world, but he was also lonely, haunted, and incomplete. Nathaniel had built an empire in the years since Vivian disappeared. Skyscrapers that reached the heavens, deals worth billions, a legacy that would outlive him. But every tower he erected only cast a longer shadow over the one part of his life he could never rebuild. Tonight felt different. Restlessness settled over him, an unease he couldn't shake. It was as if something in the house called to him, whispering to a part of him he'd long buried. He stood and left his study, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble floors as he wandered aimlessly. The mansion's vast halls loomed around him, every corner steeped in silence. His wanderings took him to the eastern wing, an area rarely visited. This part of the house was designated for the staff, an unspoken divide between their world and his. He hadn't stepped foot in this wing in years. As he moved down the dimly lit corridor, passing rows of closed doors with small brass nameplates, something unusual caught his eye. One door, slightly ajar, spilled a sliver of golden light into the hall. He paused, curiosity tugging at him. Stepping closer, Nathaniel hesitated for a moment. It was late, and he didn't want to intrude, but something compelled him to push the door open. The room was modest but tidy, its simplicity a stark contrast to the grandeur of the mansion. A neatly made bed occupied one side. A small wooden desk sat by the window, cluttered with books and loose papers, and a chair rested beneath it. What stopped Nathaniel in his tracks, however, was the painting hanging on the far wall. It was impossible. He stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The field of sunflowers, the glowing horizon, the warmth radiating from every stroke of the brush. It was identical to the painting in his study. Every detail, every nuance, was the same. It couldn't be. "Excuse me?" The voice startled him. Pulling him out of his trance, he turned sharply to see a young woman standing in the doorway. Her dark hair was tied loosely in a bun, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and wariness. Nathaniel began, struggling to find the words. He gestured toward the painting. "Where did you get this?" The woman stepped into the room cautiously, her gaze flicking between him and the painting. "It's my mother's," she said slowly. "She painted it." His heart skipped a beat. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice tight with disbelief. "Yes." She crossed her arms defensively, as if unsure of his intentions. "Why does it matter?" Nathaniel's mind raced. The resemblance was uncanny. "What's her name?" "Vivian Carter," she replied. Her tone tinged with suspicion. Nathaniel staggered, gripping the edge of the desk for support. It couldn't be. But the name hit him like a thunderclap, the truth staring back at him in vibrant yellows and golds. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice thick with urgency. Bella, he now remembered her name from the staff list, tensed, her brow furrowing. "Why do you want to know?" Nathaniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I need to see her," he said simply. Bella hesitated. She's not the same, she said at last, her voice softening. She had an accident years ago. She doesn't talk about her past. Her words only strengthened his resolve. Take me to her, he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Bella studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Tomorrow, she said quietly. I'll take you to her tomorrow. As Nathaniel left the room, the painting remained etched in his mind. Something long buried had been unearthed, and the mansion's walls, once silent, now seemed to hum with secrets waiting to be revealed. Nathaniel barely slept that night. The hours crawled by as his mind raced, torn between disbelief and anticipation. How could Vivian be alive after all these years? How could she be hidden in plain sight, tied to his home in a way he had never imagined? Questions buzzed incessantly in his head, each more overwhelming than the last. The dawn came sluggishly, its light creeping through the tall windows of his bedroom. By the time the first rays of sunlight illuminated the mansion, Nathaniel was already dressed and pacing the grand foyer. Bella had promised to take him to her mother today, but patience had never been his strength. At exactly 9 o'clock, Bella appeared at the top of the staircase, looking as hesitant as she had the night before. Her hair was tied back in the same loose bun, and her simple uniform betrayed none of the weight of what she was about to reveal. She stopped mid-step when she saw him waiting, a glimmer of surprise flickering across her face. "You're early," she remarked cautiously as she descended the staircase. "I didn't want to waste any time," Nathaniel replied, his voice steady despite the storm within. "Shall we go?" Bella nodded, but said nothing more. Leading him out of the mansion and toward a small car parked near the servants' quarters, Nathaniel climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation, his usual disdain for anything less than luxury cars entirely forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The drive was silent at first, filled only with the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle from the car's aging frame. Bella kept her eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Nathaniel, meanwhile, stared out the window, his thoughts a chaotic blur. After nearly an hour of winding roads and suburban streets, Bella turned onto a quiet cul-de-sac. The houses here were modest but well kept, their small gardens neatly trimmed. She pulled into the driveway of a single-story home with white shutters and a red door. It was unassuming, hardly the kind of place he'd imagined Vivian living in, but something about it felt strangely fitting. "She's inside," Bella said softly as she cut the engine. "But you need to know something before you go in." Nathaniel turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Bella hesitated, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. "My mom. She's not the person you remember. The accident changed her. She has gaps in her memory, and sometimes she gets confused. I don't want you to go in there expecting—" "I'm not expecting anything," Nathaniel interrupted, though his voice betrayed a flicker of unease. "I just need to see her." Bella studied him for a moment longer before nodding, without another word. She opened the car door and stepped out. Nathaniel followed, his pulse quickening with each step toward the red door. Bella knocked twice, a rhythmic pattern that spoke of habit, before pushing it open. "Mom," she called out as they stepped inside. The house was cozy but cluttered, filled with an eclectic mix of furniture and knickknacks. The smell of lavender lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee. On the far side of the room, a woman sat in an armchair by the window. Her back to them, she was painting, her brush moving slowly across the canvas. Nathaniel's heart leapt into his throat as Bella led him closer. The woman's hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a low braid that fell over her shoulder. She wore a simple cardigan, its sleeves pushed up to reveal slender arms dusted with paint. "Mom," Bella said again, her voice soft but insistent. The woman paused, her brush hovering midair, and turned to look at them. Nathaniel froze. It was her. It was Vivian, for a moment. The years melted away, and he saw the woman he had loved, the vibrant eyes, the delicate features, the quiet strength that had always drawn him to her. But then reality set in. Her gaze was unfamiliar, distant, as if she were looking at strangers. "Bella, who's this?" Vivian asked, her voice gentle but wary. Bella hesitated, glancing at Nathaniel before responding. "This is Nathaniel, Mom. I knew a Nathaniel once," Vivian interrupted, her brow furrowing as she set her brush down. She looked at him more closely, her head tilting slightly to one side. But that was a long time ago. Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Vivian," he said, taking a cautious step forward. "It's me." Her eyes darted to Bella, then back to him, confusion clouding her expression. I don't understand," she murmured. Her hands trembling slightly, Nathaniel knelt beside her chair, his voice breaking. "You don't remember me, do you?" Vivian shook her head slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "I remember pieces, faces, moments, but they're like fragments of a dream I can't hold on to." Bella stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly. But it wasn't okay. Not for Nathaniel. Seeing Vivian like this, alive but unreachable, was both a blessing and a cruel twist of fate. He had spent years mourning her, and now here she was, a ghost of the woman he had loved. As he sat there, grappling with the weight of the moment, one thing became clear. This was just the beginning. If Vivian couldn't remember, then he would uncover the truth for both of them, no matter what it took. The ride back to the mansion was a blur for Nathaniel. His mind replayed the encounter with Vivian over and over, each moment cutting deeper into the fragile hope he had carried for so long. She was alive. That much was undeniable. But the woman he had found wasn't the same Vivian he had lost. Her fragmented memory, her hesitation, the way her gaze seemed to slide past him as if he were just another stranger. It was both heartbreaking and infuriating. When Bella pulled into the mansion's driveway, she killed the engine and sat in silence for a moment before turning to Nathaniel. "Are you okay?" she asked hesitantly. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. His hands rested on his lap, clenched tightly as if trying to hold himself together. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "Thank you for taking me to her." Bella's expression softened, but there was still a trace of unease in her eyes. "I just want what's best for her," she said. "And I don't know if digging into the past is what she needs right now." Nathaniel turned to face her, his gray eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into his features. "The past is the only thing that can give her back what was stolen from her," he said firmly. "And I'm not going to stop until I figure out what happened." Bella sighed, shaking her head. "Just don't push her too hard. She's been through enough already." Without waiting for his response, she got out of the car and walked toward the servants' quarters. Nathaniel sat there for a moment longer, watching her disappear into the distance. He understood her protectiveness. Vivian was her mother, after all, but he couldn't let it deter him. Too many questions had been left unanswered for too long, and now that he had a chance to uncover the truth, he wouldn't let it slip away. Back inside the mansion, Nathaniel headed straight to his study. The familiar comfort of the room did little to ease his racing thoughts, but it was the only place he could think clearly. He poured himself a drink, though the whiskey barely touched the knot in his chest. The painting above the fireplace loomed large, its golden hues mocking him. He stared at it, searching for answers in its strokes, as if Vivian had hidden some secret within the brushwork. What had happened to her after she disappeared? Who had taken her from him? And why? And how had she ended up living such an unassuming life? Her memories shattered and her identity erased. Nathaniel set his glass down with a sharp clink and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years, the weight of it settling heavily in his chest. The line rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Mr. Brooks," came the familiar tone. "It's been a long time." "Too long, Archer," Nathaniel replied, pacing the room. "I need your help." Archer, a private investigator Nathaniel had worked with in the past, was someone who specialized in uncovering the unthinkable. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. "What's the job?" Archer asked. Nathaniel hesitated for only a moment before plunging in. "It's about Vivian. She's alive." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "You're serious." "Dead serious," Nathaniel said grimly. "But she doesn't remember anything. Not me, not her life, not what happened to her. I need you to find out where she's been and who's responsible for this." Archer didn't hesitate. "I'll start right away. Send me everything you have. Photos, names, any leads you've got." "I will," Nathaniel said, a flicker of determination reigniting in his chest. "And, Archer, keep this quiet. I don't want anyone knowing about this until I have answers." "Understood," Archer replied. I'll be in touch," as the call ended. Nathaniel felt the first stirrings of hope since his encounter with Vivian. He had a plan now, a path forward. But as he sat back in his chair, his gaze drifting once more to the painting, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he sought might be more painful than he was prepared for. The next morning, Nathaniel found himself in the eastern wing again, standing outside Bella's room. He knocked lightly, and after a moment, the door opened. Bella looked surprised to see him, but not entirely displeased. "I need to ask you something," Nathaniel began, his tone careful. Bella crossed her arms. "About my mom." "Yes," Nathaniel admitted. "She mentioned an accident. Do you know what happened?" Bella's expression darkened. "It was before I was born. She doesn't talk about it much, but from what I know, she was found unconscious near a highway. No-eyed, no family looking for her. Just alone." Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. "And no one ever came forward?" Bella shook her head. "She told me once that she felt like a ghost, like she didn't exist before that day." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I'm going to fix this," he said, more to himself than to Bella. "She deserves to know the truth." Bella hesitated before speaking again. "If you care about her as much as you say you do, then don't just focus on the past. Be here for her now." Her words stayed with him as he left, echoing in the quiet halls of the mansion. But no matter how much Bella wanted him to focus on the present, Nathaniel knew that the answers lay in the shadows of the past. The following days were a whirlwind of emotion for Nathaniel. Each time he thought about Vivian, alive but so changed, a mix of relief and sorrow washed over him. He avoided Bella for the most part, not out of rudeness, but because he needed time to process everything. Her words lingered in his mind. Don't just focus on the past. Be here for her now. But how could he? The present felt like a hollow echo of the life he had once imagined with Vivian. He had to know why she disappeared, why she was taken from him, and why her memories were locked away like some cruel joke. Archer worked quickly, sending Nathaniel daily updates on his investigation. So far, the only significant lead was the highway where Vivian had been found decades ago, unconscious and unidentified. Nathaniel wanted answers faster, but he knew this kind of work required patience. Unable to sit idle, Nathaniel decided to visit Vivian again. This time, he went alone. He didn't inform Bella, partly because he didn't want her objections and partly because he felt this was something he needed to face by himself. The drive felt longer than before, his anticipation making every mile drag. When he finally arrived at Vivian's modest home, he hesitated on the porch. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on him. He knocked softly, the sound almost drowned out by the rustle of leaves in the wind. "Coming," Vivian's voice called from inside. When the door opened, she stood there, her face lighting up in brief recognition. "Nathaniel," she said, her tone uncertain but not unfriendly. "Vivian," he greeted, his voice soft but steady. "I hope I'm not intruding." She shook her head, stepping aside to let him in. "Bella's at work," she explained, motioning for him to sit on the couch. "I know," he said. "I came to see you." Vivian tilted her head, her expression a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Why?" Nathaniel took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "Because I need to understand what happened to you. To us." Her brow furrowed, and she looked away, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her cardigan. "I don't remember much," she admitted. "Sometimes I get flashes, faces, voices, places, but they never make sense." "Flashes?" Nathaniel leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What kind of flashes?" Vivian hesitated, then gestured toward a small stack of canvases leaning against the wall. "Sometimes I paint them," she said. He stood and walked over, kneeling to sift through the paintings. Most were abstract, swirls of color and emotion, but one stopped him cold. It was a fragmented image of a face. His face. "Vivian," he said, holding the painting up. "This is me." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I didn't know for sure. I just felt it." Nathaniel swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Do you remember anything about us? Anything at all?" Vivian rubbed her temples, as if trying to coax the memories out. "I remember feeling safe, loved, but it's like looking at a photo that's been torn into pieces." The edges are there, but the middle is missing. Nathaniel sank back onto the couch, his heart aching. I loved you, Vivian, more than anything. I thought I'd lost you forever. She met his gaze, her expression softening. I'm sorry, she whispered, though the apology felt misplaced. It wasn't your fault, he said quickly. Someone took you from me, and I'm going to find out who. The determination in his voice seemed to unsettle her. She shifted in her seat, looking down at her hands. I'm not sure I want to remember, she admitted. Her words hit him like a blow. What? Why not? Because what if it's worse than I can handle? She said, her voice trembling. What if I remember things that I don't want to? What if I've built this life with Bella, and the truth ruins it? Nathaniel opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. She had a point. He had been so consumed with the idea of finding answers that he hadn't considered the cost to Vivian. I just want you to be happy, he said finally. If that means leaving the past alone, then... His voice faltered. Then I'll try to accept that. Vivian looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Thank you, she said softly. But even as he nodded, Nathaniel knew he couldn't give up. Not yet. Later that night, back in his mansion, Nathaniel received a call from Archer. I've got something, Archer said, his tone urgent. What is it? Nathaniel asked, sitting up straight. There's a connection to your brother, Travis, Archer replied. It's not solid yet, but there are enough breadcrumbs to follow. I'll need a couple more days to dig deeper. Nathaniel's grip tightened on the phone. Keep me updated, he said, his voice cold. As the call ended, Nathaniel stared at the painting in his study, the field of sunflowers glowing softly in the dim light. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the picture they would form might be darker than he anticipated. For now, he would wait. But the storm was coming, and Nathaniel was ready to face it head-on. The morning dawned with a crispness in the air, but Nathaniel felt no sense of renewal. Sleep had eluded him once again, his mind tangled in the revelations of the past days. Vivian was alive, Bella was her daughter, and Travis, his brother, might hold the key to everything that had happened. Nathaniel stood in the grand foyer of his mansion, his fingers brushing against the cold marble banister as he gazed up at the chandelier. The mansion, once a fortress of pride, now felt suffocating, its ornate walls heavy with unanswered questions. He knew he couldn't remain idle. The truth was out there, and he was closer to it than ever before. He made his way to his study, where a steaming cup of coffee awaited him, a small but consistent ritual provided by the staff. The painting of the sunflower field loomed above the fireplace, a constant reminder of what had been lost and what might still be reclaimed. As he sipped the coffee, his phone buzzed on the desk, its vibration cutting through the silence. Archer's name flashed on the screen. Archer, Nathaniel said, his voice tight with expectation. I've got more, Archer replied without preamble. Remember when I mentioned breadcrumbs? Well, the trail just got a lot clearer. Nathaniel leaned forward in his chair, his pulse quickening. Go on. Your brother Travis had dealings with a private clinic not long after Vivian's disappearance. The records are thin. He's good at covering his tracks, but there's enough to suggest he was paying someone there to keep quiet. A clinic, Nathaniel repeated, his brow furrowing. Yeah, it's a small place outside the city, and get this, they specialized in treating patients with amnesia and trauma. Nathaniel felt his grip on the phone tighten. You're saying he knew where she was? I'm saying it's highly likely, Archer said. But there's more. I dug into the property records for that clinic. Guess who was listed as a silent investor? Nathaniel's stomach churned. Travis, he said through gritted teeth. Bingo, Archer confirmed. It's not definitive proof, but it's enough to make him squirm if you confront him. Nathaniel stood abruptly, pacing the length of his study. The chandelier overhead cast fragmented shadows, their sharp angles mirroring his turbulent thoughts. I'll handle it, he said finally. Thank you, Archer. Be careful, Brooks, Archer warned. If your brother's been hiding this for 25 years, he won't give it up easily. Nathaniel ended the call and stared at his phone, his jaw set in determination. He couldn't let this go. If Travis had any part in taking Vivian from him, he would make him answer for it. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel found himself in his car, the city blurring past as he drove to Travis's office. Unlike Nathaniel's meticulous and refined style, Travis operated from a sleek but soulless high-rise in downtown Boston. The receptionist barely had time to announce his arrival before Nathaniel pushed through the heavy oak doors of Travis's office. His brother sat behind a massive glass desk, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance as Nathaniel stormed in. "Nate," Travis said coolly, leaning back in his chair. "What an unexpected visit." "Cut the pleasantries, Travis," Nathaniel snapped, his voice like steel. "I know about the clinic." For a split second, a flicker of something crossed Travis's face. Guilt, panic, before he composed himself. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said smoothly. Nathaniel slammed his hands down on the desk, making the glass tremble. "Don't play dumb with me. You invested in a clinic that treated amnesia patients right after Vivian disappeared. Why?" Travis smirked, but the confidence in his eyes faltered. "You've been busy," he said, leaning forward. "But you're grasping at straws. Brother, you always were too sentimental for your own good." "Sentimental?" Nathaniel's voice rose. "Is that what you call wanting the truth? I know you did something to her, Travis. I just don't know what yet. But I will." Travis stood, his calm demeanor cracking. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he hissed. "Vivian is gone. Let it go." "She's not gone," Nathaniel shot back. "She's alive, and she remembers enough to know you're hiding something." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in Travis's eyes. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Nathaniel leaned in, his voice a deadly whisper. "Am I?" Travis's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Nathaniel straightened, a wave of satisfaction washing over him. "This isn't over, Travis," he said, turning to leave. Not by a long shot. As he walked out of the office, Nathaniel felt a surge of purpose. Travis's reaction had confirmed his suspicions. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was darker than he had imagined. Back at the mansion that evening, Nathaniel stood once again before the sunflower painting. He thought of Vivian and Bella, of the life they could have had if not for Travis's betrayal. The past wasn't just a memory, it was alive, clawing its way to the surface, and Nathaniel was ready to face whatever lay ahead, no matter the cost. Nathaniel woke the next morning with a singular focus. Travis, his confrontation the previous day, had confirmed his brother's involvement in Vivian's disappearance. But the specifics remained maddeningly elusive. Nathaniel was no longer content to rely on Archer's slow, methodical approach. He needed answers now, and Travis wasn't going to slip away this time. By midday, Nathaniel was back at his mansion, pacing the length of his study, his eyes flicked toward the painting above the fireplace. The field of sunflowers glowing in the muted daylight, Vivian's memory lingered in every stroke, urging him forward. He picked up his phone and dialed Archer. "I need you to pull Travis's travel records," Nathaniel said without preamble. "Already on it," Archer replied, his voice crisp. "What's the plan?" "I'm going to force his hand," Nathaniel said, his tone resolute. "If he won't tell me the truth, I'll make him." Archer sighed on the other end of the line. "Just be careful, Brooks. If Travis feels cornered, he'll do something reckless." Nathaniel hung up without a response. Reckless or not, Travis had run out of places to hide that evening. Nathaniel drove to Travis's estate, his grip on the steering wheel tightening with each passing mile. The sprawling property was as ostentatious as its owner, a statement of wealth rather than taste. Nathaniel parked at the gate, ignoring the questioning glance of the security guard as he strode through. Travis greeted him in the foyer, his expression a mix of irritation and wariness. "Back so soon," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "We need to talk," Nathaniel said curtly, brushing past him into the grand living room. The space was cold and impersonal, all sleek lines and polished surfaces. Travis followed, his steps deliberate. "I thought we said all we needed to yesterday." "You might have thought so," Nathaniel said, turning to face him. "But I didn't." Travis sighed, pouring himself a drink from the bar cart. "You're wasting your time, Nate. Vivian's gone, and chasing ghosts won't bring her back." "She's not gone," Nathaniel said, his voice sharp. "She's alive, and I've seen her. The only ghost here is you, haunted by whatever you did to her." Travis froze, the glass halfway to his lips. For a fleeting moment, genuine panic crossed his face before he masked it with a forced laugh. "You're delusional," he said, setting the glass down. Do you even hear yourself? Nathaniel stepped closer, his presence imposing. Cut the act, Travis. I know about the clinic. I know about the money you funneled into it, and I know you're the reason Vivian disappeared. Travis's smirk faltered, his grip tightening on the edge of the bar. You don't know anything. I know enough, Nathaniel shot back, and I'll find out the rest, whether you cooperate or not. The tension in the room was suffocating. Travis set his glass down with deliberate care, his gaze hardening. You have no idea what you're digging into, he said quietly. You think you want the truth, but you don't. I'm not afraid of the truth, Nathaniel retorted. Travis let out a bitter laugh. Of course you're not. You've always been the golden boy, haven't you? The perfect son, the brilliant businessman, the one everyone loved. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. But you never saw what it was like living in your shadow. Nathaniel frowned, taken aback by the sudden shift. This isn't about me, Travis. This is about what you did to Vivian. No, Travis snapped. It's about what you took from me. Everything I ever wanted. You had Vivian. She was the last straw. She loved you. And there was no room for anyone else. Not even me. Nathaniel's blood ran cold as the pieces began to fit together. You did this out of jealousy. Travis's eyes burned with years of buried resentment. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice shaking. I needed to make you see what it felt like to lose. Nathaniel stared at him in disbelief. You didn't just hurt me, Travis. You destroyed her life. Do you even realize what you've done? Travis looked away, his bravado crumbling. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he murmured. Nathaniel's anger boiled over. It went too far the moment you took her from me, he roared. You've had 25 years to come clean and you did nothing. You're a coward, Travis. Silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. Travis finally met Nathaniel's gaze, his expression hollow. What are you going to do? Nathaniel took a step back, his voice cold. You'll find out soon enough. As Nathaniel left the estate, his mind churned with the weight of the confrontation. Travis's confession wasn't enough. He needed concrete proof, something that would hold up in the face of the lies Travis had built his life on. When Nathaniel returned to his mansion, Archer's name lit up his phone screen. Brooks, Archer said, his tone urgent. I've got something big. Travis just booked a flight out of the country. He's running. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Where's he going? New York first, then Dubai, Archer replied. Nathaniel's eyes hardened as he stared at the painting of the sunflower field. He's not getting away, he said, his voice resolute. The chase was on, and Nathaniel would stop at nothing to bring his brother to justice. Nathaniel wasted no time. The next morning, as the sun barely crept over the horizon, he was already preparing for what he knew would be a critical confrontation. Travis was running, but Nathaniel would ensure he didn't get far. The weight of his brother's betrayal hung heavily in his chest, but beneath the anger lay a deeper pain, a relentless ache for the years lost with Vivian. Before heading to the airport, Nathaniel made a stop. He found himself once again outside the small, unassuming house where Vivian and Bella lived. His knuckles hovered over the door before he knocked, the sound echoing faintly in the stillness of the early morning. Bella answered, her face groggy but alert as she registered his presence. Nathaniel, she said, her voice edged with surprise. What are you doing here? I need to see your mother, he said, his tone urgent but measured. It's important. Bella hesitated. She's not doing well, she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. Yesterday was overwhelming for her. Nathaniel nodded. Understanding. I won't push her. I just need a few moments. Bella gestured toward the small living room where Vivian sat, her eyes fixed on a blank canvas in front of her. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow on her silver-streaked hair. She didn't seem to notice Nathaniel's approach until he softly called her name. Vivian, he said gently. Her gaze lifted slowly, her eyes clouded with confusion. Nathaniel, she murmured, as if testing the name. You're here again. I had to see you, he replied, lowering himself to sit on the edge of the couch. There's something I need to tell you. She blinked, her expression guarded. What is it? Nathaniel hesitated, his hands gripping his knees. It's about Travis, he began. I've uncovered things that explain why you disappeared, why you don't remember. Vivian's brow furrowed, her hand instinctively reaching for the paintbrush on the table beside her. "Travis," she repeated, the name unfamiliar on her lips. "Yes," Nathaniel said, leaning forward. "He took you from me, from your life. He orchestrated everything. Your disappearance, your amnesia. He wanted to hurt me, and he used you to do it." Her hand trembled, the paintbrush slipping from her fingers. I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would he do that?" Nathaniel's voice softened. "He was jealous, Vivian, of me, of what we had. He couldn't stand being in my shadow." Vivian's breathing quickened, her hands pressing against her temples as though trying to hold her head together. "I see pieces," she murmured. "A man yelling, lights, then nothing. It's like staring at shattered glass." Bella appeared in the doorway, watching the exchange with a mix of concern and confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping closer. Nathaniel turned to her, his expression grim. "Travis is behind everything. He's been hiding the truth for 25 years. Bella's eyes widened. "That's insane. Why would he—" "Because he wanted to destroy me," Nathaniel interrupted. "And he used your mother to do it." Vivian's voice broke through, shaky but resolute. "I remember the accident," she said, her eyes unfocused. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" Nathaniel's heart clenched. "No, Vivian, it wasn't." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as her hands fell to her lap. Bella moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, "it's okay. We'll get through this." Nathaniel stood, his resolve hardening. "I won't let him get away with it," he said. "I'm going to stop him." Nathaniel arrived at the airport just as Travis's flight was boarding. The departure hall was a frenzy of travelers, their hurried steps and rolling luggage blending into a cacophony of noise. Archer had tipped off the authorities, but Nathaniel wasn't about to leave anything to chance. He spotted Travis near the gate, his usual composure replaced with an air of frantic urgency. The sight of him, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression taut, fueled Nathaniel's determination. "Travis?" Nathaniel's voice cut through the crowd. Travis turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted his brother approaching. "Nathaniel," he said, forcing a smirk. "Come to see me off." "You're not going anywhere," Nathaniel growled, stepping closer. "It's over," Travis chuckled, though the sound lacked conviction. "You don't have anything on me," he said. "All you've got are suspicions and old grudges." Nathaniel leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "You're wrong. I have enough to make sure you never see the outside of a cell again." Travis's smirk faltered, and for a moment, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. "You don't have the guts," he sneered, his voice trembling. Nathaniel straightened, his gaze steady. "Watch me," before Travis could respond. Two uniformed officers approached, their expressions stern. "Travis Brooks," one of them asked. Travis froze, his bravado crumbling. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You're under arrest," the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your detention," as the cuffs clicked into place around his wrists. Travis's composure shattered. He struggled against the officers, shouting protests and threats. But it was no use. Nathaniel watched in silence, his chest tight with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't the victory he had wanted. No matter how much justice he brought to Travis, it wouldn't erase the years of pain or the damage done to Vivian. But it was a start. As the officers led Travis away, Nathaniel turned toward the exit. The sunlight outside was blinding, but he welcomed it. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of the past beginning to lift. Nathaniel returned to the mansion that evening, his emotions swirling like a storm. Watching Travis get hauled away had brought him some sense of justice, but it also left him grappling with the enormity of what had been lost. Vivian's life, her memories, their shared future, all stolen by his brother's jealousy. The revelation was as painful as it was infuriating. In the silence of his study, Nathaniel paced restlessly. The sunflower painting loomed over the fireplace, its golden hues a stark reminder of everything he had fought for. Archer had promised to comb through Travis's records and dig deeper into the clinic where Vivian had been treated. But Nathaniel was impatient. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but they still lacked clarity. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. It was Archer. "Brooks," Archer said, his tone clipped but excited. "I've got more for you, and you're going to want to hear this in person." Nathaniel frowned. His curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "I found detailed records connecting Travis to the clinic. But there's more. Vivian's case file. It's still there, and it paints a pretty grim picture." Nathaniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Where do I meet you?" Archer gave him an address, a nondescript office space where he often worked on high-profile cases. Nathaniel wasted no time, grabbing his coat and keys before heading out. The drive to Archer's office was a blur, his thoughts consumed by the promise of answers. When he arrived, Archer was already waiting. A thick folder spread out on the table before him. "Glad you could make it," Archer said, gesturing for Nathaniel to sit. "Skip the pleasantries," Nathaniel replied, his voice taut. "What did you find?" Archer pushed the folder toward him. "Vivian's file," he said. "It's incomplete, likely because Travis pulled strings to bury parts of it. But there's enough here to give us a clear timeline." Nathaniel opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. Medical records, therapist notes, and a sparse police report painted a harrowing picture. Vivian had been found near a highway with no identification, suffering from severe trauma. The accident wasn't mentioned as deliberate in the official report, but the inconsistencies suggested otherwise. "Look at this," Archer said, pointing to a section highlighted in red. The clinic's staff noted that Vivian showed signs of amnesia and PTSD. She had flashes of memories, but nothing concrete. It looks like Travis arranged for her to be treated there under an alias, Jane Doe, then quietly ensured she never regained her identity. Nathaniel's stomach churned as he read the notes. One line stood out. "Patient often mentions the field, but becomes distressed when asked to elaborate." "The field," Nathaniel muttered. Archer nodded. "That painting she made, the sunflowers, it must have been a fragment of her memory. Something tied to you." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. The field had been their favorite place, a sprawling meadow they often visited just outside the city. It was where Vivian had painted the original sunflower piece, where they had laughed, dreamed, and planned their future. "Travis knew," Nathaniel said bitterly. "He knew exactly what he was taking from us." "There's more," Archer said, flipping to another page. "Travis wasn't just keeping her hidden. He was actively working to keep her dependent on the clinic. She was given medications that likely suppressed her memory recovery, and when the clinic shut down years later, he cut all ties. She ended up with Bella, and the rest. Well, you know." Nathaniel closed the folder, his hands trembling. The depth of his brother's cruelty was staggering. "Is there any way to undo this?" he asked quietly. Archer hesitated. "Vivian's memories might return on their own, but it's not guaranteed. Trauma like this can be tricky. The best thing you can do is be there for her. Help her feel safe." Nathaniel nodded, though the words felt hollow. He had spent so many years chasing the past, and now that it was within his grasp, it seemed as fragile as Vivian's fragmented memories. When Nathaniel returned to the mansion, Bella was waiting for him in the grand foyer. She looked tense, her arms crossed as she watched him approach. "Where were you?" she asked, her tone edged with suspicion. "Following up on Travis." Nathaniel replied, "There's more to this than you know." Bella frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathaniel sighed, gesturing for her to follow him into the study once inside. He handed her the folder. "Read this," he said. "It's about your mother." Bella sat down hesitantly, flipping through the pages. With each line, her expression shifted. Shock, anger, and finally, heartbreak. "He did this to her," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Travis made sure she stayed hidden and broken. He robbed her of her life, and he robbed us of each other." Bella looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "How do we fix this?" Nathaniel's gaze softened. "We start by helping her remember who she is, not just what happened, but the life she had before Travis took it away." Bella nodded, determination replacing her sorrow. "She deserves that. We both do." As they sat in the study, the sunflower painting above the fireplace seemed to glow brighter, a beacon of hope in the midst of their despair. The road ahead would be difficult, but Nathaniel was ready to face it, for Vivian, for Bella, for the family they were beginning to rebuild. The following morning, Nathaniel stood in his study, gazing at the sunflower painting as sunlight poured through the windows. It was hard to imagine how something so beautiful could hold so much pain. The field had been their sanctuary once, a place of joy and love. Now, it felt like a haunting symbol of what had been taken. Vivian's file, with its harrowing details, lay open on his desk. Bella had read every page the night before, her anger simmering beneath a surface of quiet determination. She had spent hours sitting with her mother afterward, softly encouraging her to remember more. Vivian, fragile but willing, had shared fragments, snippets of laughter, faint images of the field, and the name Nathaniel, which had surfaced in her mind like a whisper. Now, Nathaniel was ready to push forward. He picked up his phone and dialed Archer, who answered after a single ring. "Brooks," Archer said briskly, "I've been digging through the clinic's financial records, and I found something you're going to want to see." "I'll be there in an hour," Nathaniel replied, grabbing his coat. At Archer's office, the investigator greeted him with a stack of documents spread across the table. "This is the smoking gun," Archer said, tapping the top sheet. "Bank statements showing consistent payments from Travis to the clinic, disguised as consultation fees. But it gets worse." Nathaniel frowned, leaning over to scan the papers. "Worse how?" "There's a second account," Archer explained, sliding another set of records forward. "It's tied to someone inside the clinic. A doctor, Dr. Caldwell. He was the one overseeing Vivian's case. It looks like Travis paid him off directly to keep her sedated and isolated." Nathaniel's jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists. "So Travis didn't just abandon her there, he ensured she stayed dependent and broken." "Exactly," Archer confirmed. "And Caldwell is still practicing, though not at the same clinic. If anyone can fill in the gaps, it's him." Nathaniel straightened, his resolve hardening. "Where is he now?" "Small practice just outside Boston," Archer replied. "I can arrange a meeting if you want." "Do it," Nathaniel said firmly. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel walked into Dr. Caldwell's modest office. The building was unassuming, tucked between a pharmacy and a deli, with a faded sign that read Caldwell Family Practice. The receptionist, a young woman with a warm smile, guided him to an exam room where Caldwell was waiting. The doctor was an older man, his graying hair and tired eyes giving him a weary but authoritative presence. "Mr. Brooks," Caldwell said as Nathaniel entered. "I wasn't expecting you." Nathaniel didn't bother with pleasantries. "You treated Vivian Carter," he said bluntly. "Under the name Jane Doe." Caldwell stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "That was a long time ago," he replied cautiously. "Not long enough for me to forget what you did," Nathaniel countered, stepping closer. "You kept her sedated. You buried her memories, and you took money to keep her away from her life." The doctor shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting toward the door. "I don't know what you're talking about." Nathaniel slammed a hand on the desk, his voice low but furious. "Don't lie to me. I have the records, the payments, everything. If you want me to bring the law into this, I will, or you can start talking now." Caldwell's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. "I didn't have a choice," he said quietly. "Your brother, Travis. He made it clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. I have a family to protect." Nathaniel's glare didn't soften. "So you destroyed someone else's family instead?" The doctor sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I regret it every day. But it wasn't just about keeping her sedated. Travis wanted her memories wiped completely. He ordered us to use treatments, medications, hypnosis, to block any connection to her past. And the accident," Nathaniel pressed. "Did he cause it?" Caldwell hesitated, his expression conflicted. "I don't know for sure," he admitted. "But I do know that the timing was suspicious. She was found near a highway, with no ID, just days after Travis first contacted the clinic. It was as if someone wanted her to disappear without a trace." Nathaniel's chest tightened, the weight of Caldwell's words sinking in. "Why didn't you stop it?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I tried," Caldwell said, his voice breaking. "I tried to help her recover, to rebuild her identity. But every time I made progress, Travis intervened. He made sure she stayed broken." Nathaniel stood in silence, his hands trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. Caldwell's confession added another layer to the nightmare Travis had orchestrated, but it also gave him something he hadn't had before: clarity, As Nathaniel turned to leave, Caldwell called after him, "If she's still alive, there's a chance her memories can come back, but she'll need time and support." Nathaniel nodded without looking back. When he returned to the mansion, Bella was waiting for him again, her expression tense. "What did you find?" she asked. Nathaniel recounted everything Caldwell had said, watching as Bella's face shifted from shock to anger. "So Travis didn't just ruin her life, he made sure she could never get it back," Bella said, her voice trembling with fury. Nathaniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to fix this," he said firmly. "For her, for us," Bella nodded, her resolve matching his. As the evening settled over the mansion, Nathaniel stood once more before the sunflower painting. The path forward was clearer now. Though it was far from easy, the truth was out, but the hardest part was yet to come. Helping Vivian remember who she was and reclaiming the life Travis had stolen. Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation with Dr. Caldwell had only scratched the surface of the truth, though he now understood how Vivian's memories had been suppressed and her life manipulated. There was still a lingering question. Why had Travis gone to such extreme lengths? Jealousy alone didn't feel like a sufficient motive for such a calculated and cruel scheme. In the days that followed, Nathaniel turned his attention to Vivian, spending as much time with her as she allowed. Their moments together were quiet and tentative. She would sit in her small living room, working on a canvas while he tried to engage her in light conversation. He avoided pressing her too hard about the past, heeding both Bella's warnings and Caldwell's advice. But every now and then, a fragment of recognition would slip through, a detail or a word that hinted at the life they once shared. One morning, Nathaniel arrived at Vivian's home to find Bella waiting for him on the porch. Her arms were crossed, her face troubled. "She had another episode last night," Bella said softly. "She woke up calling for someone. Nate." She didn't even realize she'd said it. Nathaniel's heart clenched. It wasn't the first time he'd heard her call his name in fleeting moments, but each instance brought a mix of hope and heartbreak. Did she remember anything else? Bella shook her head. "No, but she's been more restless lately. I think she's starting to feel the cracks in the wall." He nodded, glancing toward the door. "I need to see her." Bella opened the door without hesitation, leading him inside. Vivian was sitting by the window, the morning light casting a soft glow on her as she worked on another painting. This one wasn't a sunflower field, but something else entirely. A fragmented image of a man and a child standing beneath a tree. The scene was incomplete, the faces blurred and undefined, but it was hauntingly familiar. "Vivian," Nathaniel said gently as he approached. She looked up, her expression brightening slightly. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice steady. "You came?" "Of course," he replied, sitting in the chair beside her. "What are you working on?" She hesitated, glancing at the canvas. "I'm not sure. It feels like something important, but I can't put it together." He studied the painting, his mind racing. The figure of the man. It was him. He was certain of it. And the child. Could it be Vivian? He began carefully. "Do you remember anything about this scene? Anything at all?" Her brow furrowed, her fingers tightening around the paintbrush. "I don't know," she murmured. "It's like a dream I can't hold on to. It slips away the moment I reach for it." Nathaniel leaned closer, his voice soft but insistent. "What if it's not a dream? What if it's a memory?" Vivian's eyes darted to his, a flicker of something, fear, hope, passing through them. "A memory," she echoed. "Yes," he said, his heart pounding. "Vivian, do you remember the field, the sunflowers? Do you remember the life we had together?" Her hands trembled, the paintbrush slipping from her grasp. I don't know," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I feel like I should, but it's all broken." Nathaniel reached for her hand, his voice steady. "It's okay," he said. "We'll piece it together, one step at a time." Bella watched from the doorway, her arms crossed tightly as if to hold herself together. For the first time, she saw something in her mother she hadn't seen in years, a spark of determination. That evening, Nathaniel returned to the mansion, his mind swirling with questions about the painting and its significance. He retreated to his study, the sunflower painting above the fireplace seeming to glow in the flickering firelight. The fragmented image Vivian had painted lingered in his thoughts, and with it came a gnawing suspicion. He pulled out his phone and called Archer. "I need you to dig deeper," he said as soon as the line connected. "Vivian's painting. It's showing something I can't explain. A man and a child. I need to know if there's more to this than we've uncovered." Archer's voice was calm but curious. "You think there's another layer to this?" "I don't know what to think," Nathaniel admitted, "but something feels off, and I can't ignore it. I'll see what I can find," Archer promised. "Give me a day or two." The next morning, Nathaniel received a call that sent his heart racing. It was Archer, and his tone was uncharacteristically serious. "Nate, you're not going to believe this," Archer said, "but I found something buried in the clinic's records. Something that didn't make sense at first." "What is it?" Nathaniel demanded. "There's a birth certificate," Archer said, his voice steady, "for a child born while Vivian was at the clinic. The father's name isn't listed, but the timing lines up exactly with her disappearance." Nathaniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. "A child," he repeated, the word barely audible. "Yes," Archer confirmed. "It could explain why Travis went to such lengths to keep her hidden. If there was a child involved, it changes everything." Nathaniel sank into his chair, his mind reeling. A child. Could it be Bella? Could she be more than just Vivian's daughter? His daughter? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Send me everything you have," Nathaniel said finally. "I need to know the truth." As the call ended, he stared at the sunflower painting, its golden hues seeming to radiate a warmth that now felt like hope. The past was unraveling, its secrets spilling into the present, and for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt a glimmer of something he thought he'd lost forever, a chance to rebuild the family he had always dreamed of. Nathaniel sat in his study, staring blankly at the documents Archer had sent. The words blurred together, but one detail stood out with crystal clarity: the birth certificate of a child born while Vivian was at the clinic. The timing, the circumstances, it all pointed to the possibility that Bella wasn't just Vivian's daughter. She was his daughter, too. The weight of the revelation settled heavily on his chest. For 25 years, he had mourned Vivian, believing she was gone forever. He had never considered the possibility that, during those lost years, a part of her had survived, had thrived, without him. But how would Bella react to the truth? She had grown up believing Nathaniel was nothing more than her mother's employer. How would she process the reality that he was her father? Nathaniel barely noticed the hours passing until Bella arrived at the mansion. She had texted him earlier, asking to meet and discuss her mother's progress. But Nathaniel knew their conversation would take a very different turn. Bella entered the study cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, crossing her arms. Her tone was guarded, but her concern for her mother was evident in her eyes. Nathaniel gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please, sit down. There's something important I need to tell you." Bella hesitated, but eventually sat, her posture stiff. "What is it?" she asked. Nathaniel took a deep breath, the weight of his words pressing against his chest. "Bella," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I've uncovered something about your mother's time at the clinic, something I wasn't expecting." Her brow furrowed, and she leaned forward slightly. "What are you talking about?" He slid the birth certificate across the desk. Bella picked it up, her eyes scanning the document. At first, her expression was unreadable, but then her hands began to tremble. This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It says she had a child while she was at the clinic." Nathaniel nodded, his heart pounding. "Bella, that child, it's you." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying?" she demanded. "I'm saying that you're my daughter," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "Vivian didn't just lose her memory during those years. She had you, and for 25 years, none of us knew the truth." Bella stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's impossible, my father. I don't even know who he was. My mom never talked about him." "She didn't know," Nathaniel said quickly, rising to meet her gaze. "Her memory was taken from her, Bella. She didn't remember me. She didn't even remember herself." Bella paced the room, her hands pressed to her temples. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "You're saying you're my father, and all this time no one knew." Nathaniel took a cautious step closer. "I didn't know," he said. "If I had, Bella, I would have done everything to be there for you, to be a part of your life." She stopped pacing, her eyes locking onto his. "And now? What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You think we just pretend everything's fine? That you're suddenly my dad and everything changes?" Nathaniel's chest tightened. "I don't expect anything from you," he said honestly. "But I want you to know the truth. You deserve that." Bella stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned away, her voice thick with emotion. "I need time," she said. "This is too much." Nathaniel nodded, though her words cut deeply. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. That evening, Nathaniel found himself at Vivian's house again. She was sitting on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if waiting for him. When he entered, her face lit up with a faint smile. "Bella told me you were coming," she said softly. Nathaniel sat beside her, his heart heavy with the weight of what he needed to share. "Vivian, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Bella." Vivian's smile faded, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" He reached for her hand, his voice steady but gentle. "She's our daughter," he said. "She was born while you were at the clinic." Vivian's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Our daughter," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded, squeezing her hand. "I didn't know. None of us did, but it's true." Tears filled Vivian's eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she processed his words. "I always felt like there was something missing," she said. "A connection I couldn't explain. And now, it makes sense." Nathaniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "As a family." Vivian's gaze softened, and for the first time in years, a small flicker of hope shone in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for never giving up on us." That night, Nathaniel returned to the mansion, exhausted but determined. The truth was out, but the journey was far from over. Rebuilding a family fractured by betrayal, and time would be no easy task. But for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt a glimmer of peace. He stood before the sunflower painting, its golden hues bathed in moonlight, and silently vowed to make things right. For Vivian, for Bella, and for the life they were finally reclaiming together. The days that followed were a blur of emotion and uncertainty. Bella, overwhelmed by the revelation that Nathaniel was her father, kept her distance. She spent most of her time caring for Vivian, whose fragile state required constant attention. Nathaniel gave Bella the space she needed, but remained steadfast in his resolve to rebuild their fractured family. Meanwhile, Archer's investigation continued to uncover damning details about Travis's actions. With each new piece of evidence, Nathaniel's anger simmered. Though Travis was in custody, the scope of his betrayal seemed endless. His jealousy had destroyed lives, and Nathaniel wouldn't rest until his brother was held accountable for every bit of it. It was late one evening when Nathaniel received a call from Archer. The urgency in his tone was palpable. "We've got a problem," Archer said without preamble. Nathaniel sat up in his chair. "What kind of problem?" "Travis is trying to make a deal," Archer replied. "He's offering information in exchange for reduced charges. He's claiming there's more to the story, something he hasn't revealed yet." Nathaniel's grip tightened on the phone. "What is he offering?" "He's saying he'll give up the name of the person who helped him orchestrate Vivian's disappearance," Archer said. "But here's the kicker. He's also threatening to run if the deal falls through. My sources tell me he's already making plans." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "He's not going anywhere. Not this time." "I figured you'd say that," Archer said. "I'll send you the details. We need to move fast." The next morning, Nathaniel found himself at the courthouse, where Travis was being held for a pretrial hearing. The tension in the air was palpable as Nathaniel entered the building, his every step echoing through the marble corridors. In the courtroom, Travis sat at the defendant's table, his expression smug. Despite the circumstances, he met Nathaniel's gaze with a smirk, his eyes gleaming with defiance as the hearing proceeded. It became clear that Travis's legal team was angling for a plea deal. They painted him as a misguided man who had made poor choices, downplaying the gravity of his actions. Nathaniel's blood boiled as he listened to their arguments, but he forced himself to remain calm when the judge announced a recess. Nathaniel approached Travis, his presence towering over his seated brother. "You think this is a game?" Nathaniel hissed. Travis's smirk widened. "It's always been a game, Nate, and you're finally losing." Nathaniel leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "You won't get away with this. Not this time." Travis's smirk faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "We'll see about that," he said. Hours later, Nathaniel received word from Archer that confirmed his worst fears. Travis had bribed a guard and was planning to escape that night. The plan was simple but bold. Use the chaos of a routine prisoner transfer to slip away unnoticed. Nathaniel acted quickly. He called in every favor he could, enlisting law enforcement to intercept Travis before he could execute his plan. As the night unfolded, Nathaniel's mansion buzzed with activity. Archer worked from a secure line, coordinating the operation with precision. "Are we ready?" Nathaniel asked, pacing his study. "Almost," Archer replied. "We've got officers in place at every checkpoint. If he tries to run, we'll have him." The attempted escape played out like a scene from a thriller. Travis, confident in his ability to manipulate the system, made his move during the prisoner transfer. For a brief moment, it seemed his plan might work. He slipped out of the transport vehicle and into a waiting car. But Nathaniel's team was ready. As the car sped away, law enforcement vehicles swarmed the area, cutting off every possible route. Travis's escape ended in dramatic fashion. With his car boxed in on a narrow street, Nathaniel arrived at the scene moments later, as Travis was pulled from the vehicle. His face was a mask of rage and desperation. He thrashed against the officers holding him, shouting accusations and threats. "This isn't over, Nate," Travis bellowed as he was dragged toward a waiting police car. "You'll regret this." Nathaniel stood watching, his expression unreadable. "It's over for you," he said quietly. Turning away as the car door slammed shut, back at the mansion, Nathaniel sank into his study chair, exhaustion washing over him. The attempted escape had been thwarted, but the weight of the ordeal still pressed heavily on his shoulders. Bella entered the study cautiously, her expression a mix of concern and hesitation. "I heard about what happened," she said softly. Nathaniel nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "It's done," he said. "Travis won't hurt anyone again." Bella sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "about everything you told me, about who I am." Nathaniel's heart clenched. "Bella, no, let me finish," she interrupted, meeting his gaze. "I don't know what this means for us, but I know I want to try. For Mom, for me, for you." Her words hung in the air, a fragile but powerful bridge between them. Nathaniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll figure it out. Together." As Bella left the room, Nathaniel turned his gaze once more to the sunflower painting. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a reminder of loss. It felt like a promise of something new, something worth fighting for. The days following Travis's failed escape were marked by a sense of uneasy quiet. Though Nathaniel had ensured his brother was securely back in custody, the weight of the revelations lingered heavily in the air. The truth about Bella's parentage had created an unsteady but genuine connection between them, and Vivian's gradual progress offered glimpses of hope. But Nathaniel knew the fight wasn't over yet. In his study, he sifted through the pile of documents Archer had provided: bank statements, clinic records, and now a newly obtained series of encrypted emails from Travis's private account. Archer had been working tirelessly to crack the encryption, and Nathaniel was certain the messages would hold the final pieces of the puzzle. Late one evening, Archer called with a breakthrough. "Nate, you're going to want to hear this," Archer said, his voice taut with urgency. "We've decrypted the emails. Travis wasn't working alone. There's a second player in all of this, someone who helped orchestrate everything from behind the scenes." Nathaniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Who?" "Dr. Caldwell," Archer replied. It looks like he wasn't just following orders. He had his own reasons for keeping Vivian in the clinic. Financial reasons. Nathaniel's stomach churned. What kind of reasons? Caldwell was paid off by Travis, yes, but he was also embezzling funds from the clinic and its patients, Archer explained. Vivian's case was lucrative for him. Keeping her sedated and isolated wasn't just about Travis's vendetta. It was about money. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Where is he now? He's still at his practice, Archer said. But this new evidence ties him directly to the conspiracy. If you confront him with this, he won't have anywhere to hide. The next morning, Nathaniel drove to Caldwell's office, his resolve unshakable. The modest building, which had seemed so unassuming during his first visit, now felt like the epicenter of every betrayal that had shattered his life. Caldwell greeted him in the same quiet, professional manner as before, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes as Nathaniel stepped into the exam room. "Mr. Brooks," Caldwell began, his tone measured, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Nathaniel didn't waste time. He placed a stack of documents on the desk between them, his voice cold and steady. "You've been lying to me, Caldwell, and I have the proof." The doctor's face paled, his hands fidgeting on the desk. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said weakly. Nathaniel leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Don't insult me. I know about the emails. I know about the money you siphoned from the clinic. And I know exactly how deeply you were involved in keeping Vivian trapped there." Caldwell's composure cracked. "It wasn't just me," he blurted, his voice shaking. "Travis. He forced me into this. He said he'd ruin my career if I didn't cooperate. And the money," Nathaniel shot back. "Was that his idea too? Or did you see an opportunity and take it?" Caldwell looked away, shame washing over his features. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. Nathaniel's voice hardened. "It went too far the moment you decided to prioritize your greed over someone's life. Vivian suffered for years because of you. Bella grew up without a father because of you. Do you even realize the damage you've caused?" Caldwell's shoulders sagged, his guilt apparent. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I can't undo what's been done, but you can help make it right," Nathaniel said firmly. "You're going to testify against Travis. You're going to tell the court everything you know, every payment, every directive, every single detail. Do you understand me?" Caldwell nodded reluctantly, his voice barely audible. "I'll do it." Later that day, Nathaniel met Archer to discuss the next steps. With Caldwell's testimony secured and the mountain of evidence against Travis growing, the case was finally reaching its climax. "You've got him, Nate," Archer said confidently. "There's no way Travis walks away from this." Nathaniel nodded, though the victory felt bittersweet. The truth had come to light, but it couldn't erase the pain or the years lost. That evening, Nathaniel returned to Vivian's house. Bella was sitting with her mother on the porch, the two of them wrapped in a quiet conversation that brought a faint smile to Vivian's face. "Hey," Bella said softly as Nathaniel approached. "Hey," he replied, his gaze shifting to Vivian. "How are you feeling?" Vivian smiled faintly, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. "Better," she said. "Stronger." Nathaniel nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and affection. "I wanted you both to know. Travis is done. Caldwell is testifying against him, and the case is airtight. He won't be able to hurt anyone again." Bella's expression hardened, but she nodded. "Good," she said simply. Vivian reached for Nathaniel's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for fighting for us." Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd fight for you both 1,000 times over," as the three of them sat together on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and orange, casting a warm glow over the quiet neighborhood. It reminded Nathaniel of the sunflower field, of the life they had lost and were now beginning to reclaim. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in decades, Nathaniel felt a sense of peace. The truth had been uncovered, and justice was within reach. Now, it was time to heal. The courtroom was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation as the judge entered and the trial began. Nathaniel sat in the front row, his gaze fixed firmly on Travis, who was seated at the defense table, despite the evidence stacked against him. Travis carried himself with the same arrogance Nathaniel had grown accustomed to over the years. But this time, that confidence was cracking. Caldwell, the clinic's disgraced doctor, had taken the stand earlier that morning, his testimony striking a blow to Travis's defense. He detailed every payment, every directive, and every deliberate act designed to keep Vivian hidden and dependent. His confession left no room for doubt about Travis's role as the mastermind behind the years of suffering. Nathaniel glanced to his side, where Bella and Vivian sat together, Bella's face was a mask of quiet fury. While Vivian clutched her hands tightly in her lap, her gaze distant but resolute, it had taken every ounce of courage for Vivian to attend the trial, but Nathaniel knew she needed to see this through, not just for closure, but to reclaim the power Travis had stolen from her when Travis was called to the stand. The room fell silent. He sauntered to the witness chair, his usual smugness replaced with a flicker of unease, as the prosecutor began questioning him. Travis's lies unraveled. His attempts to paint himself as a victim were met with pointed evidence and Caldwell's damning testimony. Nathaniel leaned forward in his seat, his heart pounding as the prosecutor delivered the final question. "Mr. Brooks, do you deny orchestrating the disappearance of Vivian Carter and suppressing her memories to further your own agenda?" Travis hesitated, his jaw tightening. For the first time, his carefully crafted composure cracked. I did what I thought was necessary," he stammered. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but Nathaniel's focus remained on Travis. The admission, though veiled in justification, was enough to seal his fate. After the trial ended, the family gathered back at the mansion. The house, which once felt suffocating, now carried a different energy, a sense of renewal and possibility. Nathaniel had insisted that Vivian and Bella stay with him temporarily, offering them a place to heal and rebuild. Bella, though hesitant at first, eventually agreed. Vivian, still fragile but determined, welcomed the chance to reconnect with Nathaniel. That evening, Nathaniel found himself in the garden, standing by the fountain as twilight settled over the estate. The sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he turned to see Bella approaching. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Nathaniel shook his head, gesturing to the bench beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Bella spoke. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "About you, about Mom, about what we've been through." Nathaniel waited, sensing she wasn't finished. "I didn't know what to think when you told me you were my father," Bella continued. "It felt surreal, like my whole life had been flipped upside down." He nodded, his chest tightening. "I can only imagine," he said softly. "I never wanted to overwhelm you." Bella smiled faintly. "You didn't, not really. I just needed time to process it, and now..." She paused, meeting his gaze. "I think I'm ready to try, to figure out what this means for us." Nathaniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. "I'd like that," he said sincerely. "More than anything." Bella's smile widened, the tension between them easing slightly. "You're not what I expected in a father," she admitted. "But maybe that's a good thing." Nathaniel chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "I'll take it." Inside the mansion, Vivian stood in Nathaniel's study, her eyes fixed on the sunflower painting above the fireplace. She had seen it countless times over the years, but tonight, it felt different. It wasn't just a reminder of the past. It was a symbol of resilience, of love that had endured despite everything. Nathaniel entered the room quietly, his presence steady and comforting. "It's always been my favorite," he said, nodding toward the painting. Vivian turned to him, her expression soft. "Mine too," she said, even when I didn't remember why. Nathaniel crossed the room, stopping beside her. "You don't have to remember everything," he said gently. "What matters is that you're here now." Vivian smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never giving up on me." "I never could," Nathaniel replied, his voice filled with emotion. "You've always been my heart, Vivian, no matter how much time passed." They stood together in silence, the weight of the years finally lifting. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like a monument to loss. It felt like a home, a place where healing could begin. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, laughter filled the dining room. Bella recounted a story from her childhood, drawing a genuine laugh from Vivian, whose face lit up with a joy Nathaniel hadn't seen in decades. The warmth of the moment was palpable, a stark contrast to the cold, quiet dinners Nathaniel had grown used to over the years. As the evening wore on, Nathaniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still scars to mend, memories to uncover, and relationships to build. But for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone in facing it. The sunflower painting hung above the fireplace, its golden hues glowing softly in the candlelight. It was no longer just a reminder of what had been lost. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of love and the possibility of redemption for Nathaniel, Vivian, and Bella. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something new, a chance to reclaim what had been stolen and build a future together, one step at a time. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the mansion's dining room, casting a golden glow over the table where Nathaniel, Vivian, and Bella sat. The air was lighter now, the silence no longer tense but filled with quiet anticipation. Over the past few weeks, they had begun to rebuild, step by careful step. Conversations grew longer, laughter came easier, and the echoes of the past began to fade. But there was still one lingering question, one final truth Nathaniel needed to uncover. Though Caldwell's testimony and Travis's trial had exposed much of the conspiracy, there were gaps in the story that remained unanswered. Most notably, the mystery surrounding Bella's birth and the events leading to Vivian's disappearance. Nathaniel looked across the table at Bella and Vivian, his resolve firm. "I think it's time we talked about the rest," he said gently. Vivian hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she placed her coffee cup on the table. "The rest?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The missing pieces," Nathaniel replied. "Your memories are starting to return, but I want us to piece them together." Together. Bella looked between them, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "You think Mom remembers more than she said?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "I do. And if we work through it, we might finally understand everything." Vivian swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I'll try," she said softly. "I want to remember. I want to understand." They moved to the living room, where the sunflower painting hung like a silent witness to their conversation. Nathaniel brought out the files Archer had compiled, laying them on the coffee table. Vivian stared at the documents, her brow furrowing as she scanned the familiar names and dates. "Caldwell," she murmured, her voice tinged with unease. "I remember his face. He was kind at first, but then..." Her voice trailed off, her hands clutching the edge of the table. "Take your time," Nathaniel said gently. "What do you remember?" Vivian closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. "I was in a room. It was cold. They kept asking me questions, but I didn't understand why. I felt lost, like I didn't belong there." Bella reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "It's okay, Mom. You're safe now." Vivian's eyes snapped open, a sudden clarity breaking through the haze. "The accident," she said, her voice trembling. "I wasn't alone." Nathaniel leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else in the car," Vivian continued, her eyes filling with tears. "A man. He was shouting, warning me about something. And then, the crash." Nathaniel's mind raced. "Do you remember who he was?" Vivian shook her head, frustration etched on her face. "No, but I think he was trying to help me. He said something about Travis, about not trusting him." Nathaniel exchanged a glance with Bella, their expressions mirrored in concern. The revelation added a new layer to the mystery. Who was the man? And how did he fit into Travis's scheme? Vivian suddenly reached for one of the files on the table, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. She stopped at a photo of the clinic, her finger hovering over the image of an older nurse standing beside Caldwell. "Her," Vivian said, her voice sharp. "She was there. She helped me." Nathaniel recognized the name beneath the photo. Evelyn Porter. According to Archer's notes, Evelyn had worked at the clinic for decades before retiring shortly after it shut down. "I'll find her," Nathaniel said, his voice steady. "If she helped you, she might know more." That afternoon, Archer tracked Evelyn down to a quiet retirement home on the outskirts of Boston. Nathaniel drove there immediately, his pulse quickening as he approached the modest building. The receptionist guided him to a small sitting room where Evelyn waited. She was a petite woman with silver hair and kind eyes that widened slightly as Nathaniel introduced himself. "I remember Vivian," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "She was one of the few patients I couldn't stop thinking about." Nathaniel leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Please, tell me everything you remember." Evelyn hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. "She was brought to the clinic after the accident, but something about her case didn't sit right with me. She didn't seem like someone who belonged there. She was frightened, confused, but not broken. "What happened next?" Nathaniel asked. Evelyn sighed. Dr. Caldwell was the one who oversaw her treatment. He said she needed special care, but I knew it was more than that. There were times when she seemed to remember things, names, places, but every time she did, he'd increase her medication. It wasn't right. "Did you know about Travis's involvement?" Nathaniel pressed. Evelyn's expression darkened. "I suspected. There were phone calls, late-night visits. I overheard Caldwell mentioning him once, saying he was paying handsomely to ensure Vivian stayed quiet. I tried to help her when I could, but my hands were tied." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Do you remember anything about Bella?" "About the child?" Evelyn's face softened. "Yes. Vivian didn't even know she was pregnant when she arrived. I was there when Bella was born. She was so beautiful, so full of life. I wanted to tell Vivian the truth, but Caldwell wouldn't let me. He said it would complicate things." Nathaniel's heart ached at the thought of what Vivian had endured. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion, "for helping her as much as you could." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She deserved better. They both did. That evening, Nathaniel shared Evelyn's account with Vivian and Bella. The details brought fresh pain, but also a sense of closure. For the first time, the full picture of what had happened began to emerge. Vivian, though shaken, found strength in the truth. "I'll never get those years back," she said quietly, "but I won't let them define me." Nathaniel reached for her hand, his voice filled with determination. "We'll make new ones," he said. Together, as the family sat together, the sunflower painting glowed softly in the firelight. It no longer felt like a relic of the past. It was a symbol of their resilience, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, hope could bloom again. Weeks turned into months as the Brooks family began the slow process of healing. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now felt alive again. Laughter echoed through its halls. Shared meals became a daily ritual, and the sunflower painting in the living room became a silent witness to their newfound unity. Vivian's memories, though still fragmented, continued to resurface. Each recollection brought moments of clarity and emotion, some joyful, others painful, but she no longer faced them alone. Nathaniel and Bella stood by her side, offering support as she pieced together the life that had been stolen from her. One morning, Nathaniel found Vivian in the garden, standing amidst the rows of blooming sunflowers he had planted months earlier. She turned to him as he approached, her face illuminated by the soft morning light. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice warm. "I remember these. They were always my favorite." Nathaniel smiled, his chest swelling with quiet pride. "They were ours," he said, "a piece of the life we dreamed of." Vivian reached for his hand, her gaze steady. "And now we have a chance to dream again." In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel worked tirelessly to ensure both Vivian and Bella could move forward without the shadow of the past looming over them. Travis's trial ended with a conviction, his sentence ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Justice, though bittersweet, gave the family a sense of closure. For Bella, the revelation of her parentage was no longer a source of confusion but a foundation for growth. She began to see Nathaniel not just as the man who had uncovered the truth, but as someone who genuinely wanted to be a father. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, built on shared experiences and an unspoken understanding of the pain they had both endured. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Bella made an announcement that brought tears to Vivian's eyes. "I've decided to go back to school," Bella said, her voice filled with determination. "I want to study art. Like you, Mom." Vivian's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with pride. "Oh, Bella," she whispered, "you have no idea how much that means to me." Nathaniel reached across the table, placing a hand on Bella's. "You'll be amazing," he said. "And whatever you need, I'm here for you." Bella nodded, her smile bright. "Thank you for everything." One sunny afternoon, Nathaniel and Vivian visited the field where the original sunflower painting had been created. The meadow stretched endlessly, bathed in golden light, its beauty unchanged despite the passage of time. For Nathaniel, It felt like stepping back into a memory. For Vivian, it was a chance to reconnect with a part of herself she thought had been lost forever. As they walked hand in hand through the field, Vivian stopped suddenly, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This is where I painted it," she said softly. The first sunflower painting. I remember sitting right there, with you beside me." Nathaniel's heart swelled. "I never stopped thinking about that day," he said, "even when I thought I'd lost you forever. This place reminded me of you." Vivian turned to him, her eyes filled with emotion. "And now we're here again," she said, her voice trembling. "It feels like we're starting over." Nathaniel pulled her into an embrace, his voice steady. "We are," he said. "This is our beginning." As the months passed, the family settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. Nathaniel divided his time between his business and his family, ensuring both flourished. Vivian began painting again, her works reflecting the strength and beauty of her journey. Her art became a source of healing, not just for her, but for Bella, who often joined her in the studio. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathaniel, Vivian, and Bella gathered in the living room. They sat together, sharing stories and laughter, the warmth of their bond palpable. The sunflower painting above the fireplace glowed softly in the flickering light of the fire, a testament to the love and resilience that had carried them through the darkest of times. As the night deepened, Vivian reached for Nathaniel's hand, her gaze steady and filled with gratitude. "We've come so far," she said, "and it's because you never gave up on us." Nathaniel smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "I could never give up on my family," he said. "You and Bella are my everything." Bella leaned her head against Vivian's shoulder, her voice soft. "And we're stronger because of you." The mansion, once silent and cold, now hummed with life and hope. For Nathaniel, Vivian, and Bella, the past was no longer a chain that bound them, but a bridge that connected them to a brighter future. Together, they had faced the truth, confronted their pain, and emerged stronger, their love unshakable. As they sat together beneath the sunflower painting, the world outside seemed to fade away. In that moment, they were no longer defined by loss or betrayal. They were a family, whole, resilient, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. And for Nathaniel, as he looked at the women he loved most, he knew one thing for certain: the sunflowers would always bloom again.